Hey, well, good afternoon for most of our folks, but if you're out there past the East Coast time, good morning. Welcome again to What's Up, Know, Learn, Fly. Type of thing. And just make sure you type your question down below here and then click that send button. And that way we'll make sure that we see your questions because we'd love to hear from you. And then if you're on a tablet watching, then you want to look for something like this. Looks like a question mark. Want to type your question in the little box here and then make sure you click that send button so that we make sure that we see your question. And we will do our best. As always, we always have a great audience here on What's Up. Oftentimes right now we're surpassing 500 attendees, which is pretty common. So we love you guys. We will do our best to answer your questions, but bear with us because they come in fast and furious and oftentimes we can't answer them all. My name is Chris Moser. As always, I work here at AOPA. I am a CFI, also was a school teacher for a long time, and I work to help support schools and CFIs. And with me, I'm glad to have with me Dan Justman. What do you have to say, Dan?
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here. Instrument-rated private pilot. Thrilled to be able to lead the You Can Fly teams and programs that help support and grow the pilot community. And also up, I can't see the presentation at this moment. So is it Katie or is it Stephen?
It's Katie.
It's Katie. Awesome. Well, then back by popular demand. Happy to reintroduce Ms. Katie Pribyl, who is one of the brain trusts behind the You Can Fly program and is also back with AOPA as the Vice President of Capital Campaigns. Katie, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I'm coming to you from the great state of Montana. It's still morning here. So I'm happy to be back. I love the topic today. And I am excited to share some really, fun and educated.
Yes, educated on the backside.
Awesome. And then, of course, Stephen Schroeder, our behind-the-scenes guy. Please say hello, Stephen.
Hello, Stephen. Nailed it, Dan. Nailed it.
Thank you. It's taken me 2 years.
Yeah.
Look, he's revealing. Look at this. You can see Stephen's glasses on this picture.
Yeah.
What's happening, Stephen?
I like your idea, Katie, of people pulling data composites over the years. See if they can figure out what I look like.
That's right.
Maybe we'll have some prizes to give away.
You know, we have some very resourceful people that listen to this webcast.
Coordinator with the Flight Training Initiative, work with Chris and Dan directly, get to do all kinds of fun tasks like producing this webinar, working with our Flight Training Experience Awards, and a variety of other tasks. So just happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. All right, Dan, take us away with the AOPA Foundation.
Awesome. What's Up, Know, Learn, Fly, and all other You Can Fly programs are funded by generous contributions to the AOPA Foundation from individuals and foundations and organizations that believe in the importance and the safety of general aviation, and they provide us the means to get to do what we get to do every day. So would encourage all, please do help support the mission. If you would like to see GA thrive in programs like What's Up and the other programs that are produced by our You Can Fly team, please do consider donating at aopafoundation.org.
There it goes.
And yes, I don't see questions yet, but normally we get them. Yes, for those that are watching live, Wings credit is available. If you registered with your FAAsafety.gov email address, all is done. You won't need to do anything. In a couple days, you'll see that show up on your account. If you aren't sure, please send an email to ftinitiative@aopa.org, and Stephen will jump on it and make sure that we've got the right email address used for that. And also, question number 2, what happens if you found something in this webinar particularly interesting or wondering about and you want to go back and view it? You certainly can. This webinar, as well as the rest of the What's Up webinars, are recorded and available on our YouTube channel, AOPA Pilot Video, under the What's Up playlist, and also webinars.aopa.org. Still living under the Don't Get Rusty moniker, but we're there. So either way, you can come back and see these recorded versions. You will not get, unfortunately, Wings credit if you're watching on one of the recorded versions.
And hey, Stephen, I know we've got the email listed up there, but do you still have that link to the spreadsheet that you can use to submit any questions about the Wings credit stuff?
Yes, I'll pull it up and drop it into the questions for all.
Okay, so check for that link because that's really a direct link to get right to Stephen with verifying your email address. All right, Stephen, what happened today back in 1970 or close to yesterday?
Oh yeah, I guess it was yesterday. December 18th, 1970, Airbus Industry was formally established to develop the Airbus. It was a joint venture between France, Germany, and England to try to compete with companies like Boeing, who were developing large passenger planes, and they wanted to try to keep up with the industry. That's where Airbuses came from.
I think they're still around today.
Yeah.
Just maybe. All right, very cool. All right, so what is on the checklist today? Well, this is going to be a slightly different episode because I was kind of brainstorming and we were thinking about what we were going to talk about. And so I was like, what if we talked about lessons learned the hard way? And I've got some of my own stories. I know, Katie, you were one of the first people I thought of in terms of the fact, mainly because you're a professional pilot, not because you go out and make mistakes, but stuff that we definitely learned. And so we're going to talk about some lessons that we learned the hard way, how it changed our decision making, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to try to avoid making some of those same mistakes too. So I'm excited. And Katie, can you give us a little bit of your background too? I know the folks have heard me talk multiple times about the fact that I flew freight out in Arizona. What's your background too, where you got some of this experience?
So I started pretty young. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Montana. Had no idea I wanted to fly airplanes till I was about a junior in high school, and then attacked it. I learned to fly in Great Falls up here at Holbin Aviation, and went off to Embry-Riddle, joined the airlines right out of school. They were hiring regional pilots like crazy, and then 9/11 happened. Was laid off about 3 or 4 years after 9/11, and decided, that maybe something in policy and politics would have interested me. I was based in DC at the time, so that's when I got into the aviation, trade policy work, Gamma, AOPA, and I own a Cessna 180, flew the CRJ 200 for the airlines, on a Cessna 180, have a seaplane rating, through AOPA, and especially Mark Baker, who encouraged us to learn to fly new airplanes. And, I have had the privilege of flying a lot of different things in a lot of different places, both in the US and around the world. So I feel fortunate that I've been able to try a lot of different things. And I do believe, Mark did too, I do believe it's one of the best ways to keep your skills up, is to fly new airplanes, even if it's just a rating and you may never use it much. It's really valuable. So that's my background. A lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is in my 180. So.
And of course, we're going to talk too about that exact thing too, about transitioning airplanes. I know when we get a little closer to the end, but that whole issue of making sure you're careful. So the big thing, I think the big theme we're going to talk about today is really good decision making and being cautious. So tell you what, let's get into it. So we both got some stories here. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to tell you some kind of versions of our stories, tell a little bit about what happened to us, and then we'll talk about what we learned and some suggestions. So for me, this came from this idea of expectations on our abilities as pilots. And for me, it came when I first came back to AOPA here after having been out in Arizona, and I flew freight, and then I went back to teaching for a while. And when I got back in the cockpit, two things happened to me pretty early in flying here. And I was almost like the main issue was I was putting pressure on myself, having been a full-time professional pilot. I was thinking like I should still be able to fly like that, and just sort of like having an expectation that I should be able to perform at the level that I did. And here's what happened. So the first one was I was coming. I drew this little diagram here. I've sort of put it together. I was coming in. It was at sunset from the east, sort of heading west to Frederick, and you can see there's a little mountain range here. It was really hazy. I forget what I was coming back from, somewhere over the bay, and the sun was showing through that haze, and it was like impossible to see anything. It was almost like, it wasn't instrument conditions, but it was really poor visibility, and I couldn't see very far. And I talked to Frederick Tower. I was coming in. They told me go ahead and enter the left down one for 2-3, I believe it was. And I was like sitting there thinking to myself, I see the airport on the GPS, but I cannot see the runway how am I going to enter this downwind? And so I thought, well, I guess I'm supposed to get down to altitude and enter, and it should work out. That was probably not the best decision. Luckily, there was nobody in the pattern. Nothing happened, and I was able to see the airport eventually. But I definitely thought a lot about that one afterwards. And the more I thought about it, I said, you know what I should have done is I should have stayed up at altitude and waited till I saw the airport below me and then entered the downwind. And so I even actually called ATC. I talked to them sometime after that and even asked them, like, what should I have done? Or would it have been okay had I done this? Because I could not see. I could not see where the airport was. I couldn't tell if there was traffic. And they said, absolutely, you just tell us what you're doing. So that was one I learned. And along with that, it was around that same time that I was in the traffic pattern. And I remember they'd called somebody in front of me. I was on downwind. I had them. And then something happened. I looked away and I lost them. And then it was that pressure again where I was like, I'm supposed to be this professional pilot. I should be able to find this traffic. And instead of just being like, I lost traffic, I just kept looking. I did pick them up not too long after that. But it was that reticence that I found at first of like wanting to admit that, hey, I can't see them or I don't have them. So for me, it was sort of self-induced pressure and expecting my abilities to be more than they were at the time. And I should have just been like honest with myself and just been like, it's all good. So how about you, Katie?
Well, I mean, I mentioned that I learned to fly in Great Falls, Montana. So if you can imagine like a 18-year-old learning to fly in Great Falls and the winds out here. If you guys have flown in Montana or out west, like it gets pretty intense, and Great Falls is like one of the windiest places. I think we're always ranked like number 2 or 3 behind Cheyenne for the windiest places, you know, in the United States. So, you know, I learned to fly. I mean, a crosswind at 10 knots or 12, 13 knots when I was learning to fly was like not really uncommon. But when I bought my 180 and started learning to fly the tail dragger, like in earnest, the Skywagon no less, which if you guys know anything about flying Skywagons, they are super susceptible to crosswinds and ground looping. I mean, you hear stories all the time. And so I had to say to myself, you know what, like going out in a 10 or 15 knot crosswind and a 182 or whatever, I'd take my nieces and nephews and I'd feel confident in my abilities to manage that. When I got my 180, I was like, whoa, no way. And even today, I really think about taking passengers when I'm going out in squirrely winds, and I feel confident in the aircraft and my abilities, but I'm like, you know what, I'm not gonna take somebody with me today because I'm just, you know, it's gonna be squirrely, it might be a little uncomfortable. And, you know, it's, so I had to really, knock myself down a peg, so to speak, you know, when I got my 180 and relearn how to land in a crosswind for sure.
Absolutely. So. And did you ever have any issues? I know you got some issues coming up in a little bit too, but did you ever have any issues like when you're first learning that crosswinds in the 180 that sort of made you go, whoa?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, and you know, I took people with me. Dave Hirschman, you're going to hear me talk a lot about him. He's been a great mentor to me and was a great instructor. Mark Baker, same thing. Like I just took people with me until I felt a lot more confident in it. And even then, I found that landing currency in my 180 is more important than any airplane I've ever flown. You know, if I haven't flown my 180 in a while and I'm going to go fly in a wind, I go, I'm going to find a runway and I can land more in a headwind than a crosswind today until I do a couple more landings. And, you know, I didn't feel that, you know, in tricycle gear airplanes before, but my 180, it's just a whole new respect for the wind.
Yeah, that little tail lights like, whoop. So yes, I get what you mean. All right. So biggest things we learned there, I know for me, it was being honest with ATC, like talking to them was a big lesson that I learned. So and in fact, I confirmed that with multiple conversations over time of talking to air traffic controllers. Just be honest with them and ask, and I don't know how I got that misspelling in there, but also be honest with yourself. I did yourself by accident there, but so be honest with yourself, because that's that idea of knowing your own limitations. And then I know the other part is like, don't be afraid to ask for help, whether it's going and getting an instructor. I do that. I go grab an instructor when I'm feeling a little not as confident about something. You too, Katie?
Oh yeah, always. And I do that a lot in the backcountry. Like if I'm going to go into a strip that is challenging, I know it's challenging, I've talked to other people and I haven't been in there, before I go in, I'll take somebody with me that's been there before.
Yep.
It's just a really good practice. Like just, you don't have anything to prove. You really don't, to the airplane or yourself.
That is the key right there. There's nothing to prove. In fact, I learned that lesson here too, because there was I remember it was Tom Zecchi here told me to, was one day that was I had a student, the weather was kind of like a little iffy. And I was like, well, maybe. And he's like, you know, we don't have to fly here. And it was unlike when I was doing it as a job where it was like pretty much, if it was within limits, you're going, you know, it's like, so, yeah. All right, let's go to the next one here. I got a picture of the 180 there, but forgot to put it up. So I'll leave that for a moment. I don't know if that's yours. I got it off of AOPA's website, but it is a 180.
I mean, it
So
kind of looks like mine. It's shiny.
it very well might be. Looks like the 61576. Is that your tail number? Or?
22 Alpha. It looks pretty close. Maybe.
It looks a lot like it. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one here. Here we go. All right. So now we were talking about the idea of take the time to listen and heed, kind of getting the idea of the experience thing. So I'm going to let you start this one off, Katie. You had an experience in the Super Cub up near Milwaukee.
Yeah, I was flying Mark Baker's Super Cub on amphibs. I'd flown it a lot before. I actually got my SUPANE rating in it, had taken it on a trip to Montana, but never needed the reserve tanks. Plenty of fuel for where I was going. It's good when you're in a Super Cub to land often and stretch your legs when you're almost 6 feet tall. And so, yeah, never used a reserve tank, but we were doing a long trip. It was Mark Baker was an airplane and me, and we had another couple AOPA employees in a 172. And a colleague said, you know, had you ever used the reserve system on this tank and or on this airplane? And you know, I said no. So he briefed me on it. And Mark Baker came over 10 minutes later as we're getting ready to go, and he said, you know how the reserve system works? And I was like, yeah, no worries. I just got briefed. I'm good. You know, no, I'm good. Let's go. Coming into Milwaukee after flying over the lake, I needed the reserve fuel. I was, you know, about to, I was starting to descend underneath the airspace, Class Bravo airspace and Class Charlie airspace, and get to my destination. I was probably about 1,000 feet in the air, and my engine quit because I wasn't getting fuel. And I thought I knew how to use the reserve system, but apparently not, because there was a lot of gas in my reserve tank, and I couldn't figure out how to get to it. And there was a combination of levers between the mains and the reserve that you had to know, and that part was left out of the briefing. And you know, I know Mark would have told me that if I had just taken 3 or 4 minutes for Mark to give me a second briefing. Like, what's the harm in getting a second briefing, right? I thought, no, I got it, I knew it, let's just go. You know, we don't need to take your time, Mark, you know, to brief me on something I already know. But I hadn't gotten that level of information. I should have just taken the 2 or 3 minutes. You know, it was, there's a little pocket factor involved in this, because I'm at 1,000 feet. Now my engine quit, and it took me a couple 100 feet to figure out what combination of levers I needed to get that fuel to the engine, and I did. It started up again about 600 feet above the ground, but I was getting to the point where I was going to stop troubleshooting and start, you know, making a plan to land the airplane in suburban Milwaukee, you know, which
oh my gosh, yeah,
options. So, you know, and I'm an amphib, right? I'm a Super Cub. I got floats, I got all sorts of drag. I mean, you can imagine. So it was coming down a lot faster than I wanted it to, but I figured it out. But it was such a huge lesson for me. I mean, I taxied in, I walked right up to Mark and told him what happened. I mean, it was such a huge lesson. Take the extra briefing, you know, why not? It's, yeah, such an easy lesson.
And I had a similar lesson like that. In fact, I do remember I have the extra thing here. There we go. This is a sectional chart. This is Gunnison, Colorado over here. And if you've ever been up there, you can see on the chart here, those are some big mountains. I learned how to fly on the East Coast out here where, you know, we've got the stuff around Frederick where it's maybe 1,000, 1,500 feet. And you can see these mountains are topping 14,000 feet. And what happened here was I was teaching out in Arizona, down in Phoenix. I had a student of mine who was working on a CFI, had his own airplane. It was a Cessna 172. And he had asked me, he's like, hey, can you take the airplane up? And he wanted me to just get his wife, just kind of take his wife up for him and get it to Gunnison because she worked up there. And he says, go ahead and stay over the night. She's this really cool archaeologist. You can go to the dig site or whatever and fly back in the morning. He specifically told me, stay the night and come back in the morning. You don't want to come back in the mid-morning to afternoon. So we get up, crack of dawn, we're out there as the sun comes up. The flight was beautiful, had this tailwind, air was smooth as glass. I mean, it was a beautiful flight, and we were cooking with this tailwind. So we get up there, and I'm like, hey, we're early, this is awesome. And so she asked me, she's like, hey, do you want to go ahead and just stay the night? You know, we'll get you up in the cabin or whatever they had up there. And I was like, nah, I'm good. It's like, I'm gonna go home. I think the weather's looking great. She's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, it'll be fine. I took off, I got fuel, I took off out of there, and it had to be one of the longest flights that I feel like I've ever done. There was turbulence the entire way. The airplane was just boom, boom, boom the whole time. And of course, then I was trying to drink water, but I didn't want to drink too much because I didn't want to have to stop to use the restroom. So then I have no doubt that I was up at altitude, starting to get dehydrated, and it was taking forever because of this tailwind. When I finally got back to Deer Valley, I can remember it being one of the worst landings I've ever had. I was in a 172, which I had tons of time in, but I remember coming down and kind of going boop, boop on the other main, then the other main, and then I thought, okay, I'm good, and then I relaxed, and then the nose wheel came down. I thought they were already all down, and I was like, what the heck was that? It was horrible. And so I'm sure that I had some dehydration, maybe some hypoxia, who knows. But the big lesson learned here was I learned from that was I should have listened to the guy. He knew that the stuff that route got like that because he flew it all the time, and he knew it was bad. And I had get-there-itis or whatever, and I decided. So same thing. If somebody's got experience doing, you should listen to it and heed it, just like you, Katie, taking that time to get that briefing. So if somebody's telling you with experience, please make sure you listen to them. They've got a reason they're trying to tell you that, and especially if they're pushing you towards caution rather than doing something brash.
That's right. We're telling you stories today, so you won't repeat them.
Please don't. Yeah, please don't do what I did. Okay. Speaking of get-there-itis, for me, I had 2 times when I've gotten in the worst weather I've ever been in. Both, I was flying freight. I was in a Piper Lance. And what happened on both times, it was Friday night, and our Friday night run coming home was always later because the banks closed later. We were delivering checks. And so it was always in the dark. One time was down in Fort Huachuca, which is down south of Tucson, so southeast of Tucson. And then Lake Havasu, which was just part of my run coming back. It's out on the Colorado River up near the high country, but down in a valley that goes like where the Colorado River goes. And in both cases, I had gotten a briefing. There were no thunderstorms or anything, but there were storms. And in one case, even the one out of Havasu, my dispatch, I tried to take off, tried to go over to Parker, Arizona. There wasn't any weather brief there, and I couldn't see, so I just turned right back around. I'm like, I was maintaining VFR, but I'm like, I can't see. So I turned right back around, went back to Havasu. I called my dispatch and said, I can't get out of here. I can't get to Parker. I can file IFR. He's like, no, I'll send a chieftain to come get you. And I was like, no, I'll be okay. I'll just file IFR and go out of here. And in both cases, I ended up getting into some of the worst rain. I mean, the rain came down so hard in that airplane that I couldn't hear the engine. I've never seen rain that heavy and thick. It was over Blythe, California. I remember that trying to get to that VOR. And it was coming down like crazy. The plane was just bouncing, and that scared me. And then the same thing coming out of Fort Huachuca. It was some of the worst turbulence in a rainstorm again. And in both cases, why? Because I was like, I don't want to stay at the outstation on a Friday night. I want to go home. So what I definitely learned from that is get that briefing and do not do that. So if the weather's bad, it's better just to stay, hunker down, wait for a little while, even if I had to go home later. How about you, Katie?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have a story. I was in my 180, and I used to fly when I was still based full time in Frederick. I would fly my 180 out to Montana and back a couple times a year because why not? It was super fun. Trying to get back for work on one trip. It was early fall, so the winds are pretty high at that time. Going in, flying across North Dakota, where all the runways are pointed in the same direction across the entire state. So if the wind's blowing, like literally every runway is pointed in the same direction in that state. And I landed with a pretty big crosswind. And it was actually, while I was refueling the airplane, it was a small airport, self-serve fuel. It was so windy. It's one of those winds where like the flag is straight out and the only thing moving are the tips at the very end.
It's like vibrating. Yeah.
So it was that kind of wind. And it got a little worse, even though I did a quick turn as I possibly could, fueled the airplane in the wind and went to the bathroom, got back in the airplane. I was like, man, now I got to turn this airplane broadside to get on the runway. And it was everything I could do. I mean, literally everything that rudder had to get broadside. And then I just turned diagonal wind and took off like across the runway, not down the runway, but across the runway. And of course I had nobody with me, but I remember saying to myself, that was it. That was the limits of that airplane and my ability. But I had to get back for work, and if there was any organization that would have understood, I had called AOPA, my boss at AOPA, and said, hey, look, it's going to take me an extra day to get home because the winds are so bad across this entire state of North Dakota. Like, I need to just sit here. And I know they would have understood. I mean, they wouldn't have even questioned it, but still I had that feeling, that sense I had to get back to work and, I have meetings and I need to be there. Yeah, it could have turned out much, much worse. I got really lucky, and I really was at the limits of that airplane, and I shouldn't have been there.
And I think that kind of the key there, and I know you had something similar happen in Great Falls, is that right? Or
Again, the wind is always blowing. And in that case, I needed to get home because we had, my sister's a vet, we had the vet coming and we were going to do preg checking. And, I had to get home to help out. Everybody has a job on the ranch, and I needed to get home and do my job. And yeah, I came back from picking up a friend in Sydney and landed in Great Falls. And, I could have flown to Helena and waited it out a little bit or driven home, and that's what I should have done. I landed in Great Falls. And again, it was the limits of the airplane. One of the things Dave Hirschman taught me when I learned to fly my 180 was, if you're going to get pushed into the wind, right, you've got to add power to regain that rudder authority. And it feels really uncomfortable because you're going to turn into the wind, which is generally not down the runway. It's like pointed off, right? And I had to do that. I had to execute that maneuver. I never knew, like, in the moment if I'd be able to do it, which is turn into the wind and add power. So you're like literally accelerating
off the runway. Yeah.
Great Falls, it's a really big runway, you guys. It's like 12,000 feet. It's well over 100 feet wide. And so, yeah, I did. I added power, turned into the wind, regained authority, got myself straightened out, and got that tail on the ground. But man, again, one of those things where I could have landed in other places and waited out and been a few hours late. Should have done it.
For you, where was the pressure coming from? I'm just kind of curious. Yes.
Myself, right? Yeah, no, I felt I needed to be home. I didn't want to make that phone call, and say, hey, you're going to have to wait on me, or I can't get there. But I know if I had told my parents, look, it's not safe for me to fly into Great Falls today. I just got to wait a few hours for the winds are forecast to come down in 2 or 3 hours. I'm going to wait. Oh, they're my parents. Of course, they would have been like, yes, of course, that's what you should do.
Yes.
Or in the case of AOPA, of course, that's what you should do. It was
and
all.
I'd say in the case for me too was the same thing. Even with the freight, I told you the dispatcher even said, just wait, I'll send a chieftain to come get you, because I was in a Piper Lance, which I'll show a picture of later. Same deal. So to me, what I want to emphasize to the audience is that this pressure is often self-induced. If you asked your family, and even in the case of like you were talking about AOPA, Katie, even your employer, they would have been like, stay safe, stay on the ground. Do not do that. And yet, who are the ones making these decisions? It was me and you doing it to ourselves. So please take that to heart, because honestly, I'm thinking about those flights and I'm getting like that pit in my stomach because I was scared.
Oh, I mean, I was flying into Great Falls and I would like listen to the ATIS like every 3 minutes, even though I knew it wasn't going to change, or I was on my 4th flight, like looking for an update to the VTAR. Like, it's not going to change, Katie. Like, yeah. And that anxiety of, the approach and getting closer, like it is. And you go like, why am I here? I don't want to be here.
What am I doing?
Yep. What am I doing? What am I doing?
Unfortunately, there's a little more of that coming. So I'm hoping these stick together. And speaking, here's one where this is a little different theme. And I'm hoping you guys get the idea here. We're doing kind of end of the year confessions here, hoping that you'll learn from our mistakes and taking the fact that it's like, if other people do it, you probably will do it too. And that's, I'm hoping this helps. But Katie, tell us a little bit about this situation that happened with underfueling the airplane.
Yeah, so there's a story here. There's a couple stories. It was one trip. I was, again, with Dave Hirschman, and we had flown out to Colorado to do some backcountry flying, and we were flying, in this case, we were flying back, and there's 2 stories to this trip. I tried to kill Dave once, and then Dave tried to kill me. This is when Dave tried to kill me. We were in Wichita, Kansas, and I ran in to do the paperwork, I think, and he refueled the airplane for me. And I remember looking at it when I paid for it. I thought, I thought it would have taken more than that. It seems a little extra cheap, And I thought it, but I didn't act on it, because I'm like, Dave knows this airplane. He's flies Skywagons all the time. He's refueled my airplane before. Like, surely he filled it up. When we were going from Wichita all the way to Frederick, and with the tailwind we had, we're like, oh, we can easily get there without having to make another stop. So Chris played that video for you. This is what fuel gauges in a 1956 180 look like all the time. I have now invested in a fuel totalizer, which is what I really use to calculate how much gas I have, because this is what it looks like literally when you're flying. I don't know if you guys can tell how much fuel I have in that tank, but I can't. But It took me about a year to, get some upgrades made on the airplane after I bought it. So I flew like this for quite a while, and I knew what the bouncing should look like. When I was getting lower and I had an hour of gas or, less, I knew what that bouncing looked like. And we were like in Indiana, and it was starting to bounce, like not as much as it should have. It got way down to that no takeoff range, and it wasn't really bouncing. And I said, Dave, just looking at this, I don't think we have as much gas as we thought. I think we're going to have to stop. He's like, no, I filled it up all the way to the top. I just kept looking at these gauges not bouncing like they should have. And I said, no, we need to stop. And sure enough, we stopped, and we had about 30 minutes of gas left, not near enough to get home to Frederick, but, trust your instincts, right? I mean, that's what I learned there. I mean, I questioned it when I paid the bill, and that's when I should have taken action, and I didn't, because I trusted my buddy. And, Dave would not have been offended had I jumped up on the wing and looked. He wouldn't have at all, and especially after I tried to kill him in the mountains.
That's coming up here, yeah.
But, double check. It's okay to double check and trust your instincts. When you feel like, I mean, I'm so glad I did ultimately trust the instinct that gauge is not doing what it should be. Another lesson learned is like, pay attention to your airplane, learn its idiosyncrasies, like those small things can make a really big difference. And in this case, it was just how much that white needle was bouncing, or in this case, not bouncing. And I had learned, and I had paid attention to, what that behavior should be and shouldn't be. And so I'd paid attention to those little things about your airplane. That's also really important.
So, and absolutely, and I think the big thing here too is we can also take a flip side of that as well, is that especially when you're flying with crew or another pilot or whomever, it's like, also don't be offended if the other person wants to double check, please use it. That's kind of that CRM, like crew resource management idea. And so don't be offended. In fact, invite them, please double check me to make sure that I didn't screw up. And it's like, and I'll do the same for you to back each other up. Dan, was that you or?
Nope.
No. Okay. Just checking. All right. Let's go to the next one. So the big thing is make sure you double check and don't be offended and help each other out. Be a team. All right. Let me skip past that. All right. So here's one. Oh my gosh. I had an eventful, like I only flew freight for about a year. It was eventful though. I had some stuff that happened to me doing this, maybe because I was flying every day, but I was flying. It wasn't too long after I had upgraded to the Piper Chieftain, which you can see here. This is a brand new paint went out there at Burbank in the hangar for the company where I worked. And you'll notice what they did is they put a hatch. Normally a Chieftain does not have a hatch there in the cockpit. And we had those because we would load cargo all the way in the back area here. And there was a wall, you can kind of see it in the picture there, that we had a wall with a small door in it, and we would load cargo all the way up into that. So you couldn't go out through the back because the passenger hatch is right here. So we mainly use that for cargo. And so this was our way in and out. During training, they had told us about that hatch. It had a couple of latches on it. Like there were two, as I recall. And they said, make sure those latches are down and make sure it gets into this particular position, because if it comes loose and if those latches come loose or whatever, and that hatch opens, it can get ripped off into the airstream and potentially hit your tail surface. And obviously that would be bad. We don't want that to happen. So I remember they really impressed that upon us during training. And so I always try to be very vigilant about it. Well, what happened? One morning I was taking off out of Sky Harbor. I was heading north. As you can see kind of my route here, Sky Harbor down here at the bottom. I was heading north. We pretty much always filed IFR out of Sky Harbor and usually IFR coming back in. And as I was climbing out, I was just south of Scottsdale here. And I remembered the hatch being from where it was kind of going and just popping open slightly. The latch was still there, but it was light. And so of course, the first thing I'm thinking is I screwed up. Like I didn't do something right, and I've got to try to fix this, because I was like, what am I? Well, of course, I'm also thinking, what am I going to do? So I had been leveled off at that point. They had told me to hold, whatever the altitude was. I'd leveled off, and so I'm thinking, okay, I've got to try to close this thing. So at first, I'm just trying to pull it, trying to get it closed, and I couldn't get that latch down. And I'm like, what am I going to do? So then I had the real brain, like just amazing. I don't want to call it brainchild. This was pretty stupid. So the next thing I thought was, well, what if I unlatch it all the way? So maybe I can pull it closed more and then relatch it. And there were two latches on the thing, but maybe I can pull it almost like a car door is what I was thinking. This was really dumb because I know yesterday when I told you, or the day when I told you the story, Katie, you know what happened next. When I unlatched it, that hatch went out, and now I'm holding on to the little handle of it and trying to hold it closed. And I'm thinking, oh no. And I could see Deer Valley over here, and I kept thinking, do I need to go back to Sky Harbor? Do I need to go land at Deer Valley? And all I kept thinking was, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get in trouble with the company because here I am, this relatively new pilot, and I've done something dumb, and it's my fault. So then I'm like, okay. And I started thinking like, okay, I think I need to go land at Deer Valley. I still didn't want to admit to ATC what happened, being stupid, but I started slowing the airplane down. And we had been also very much taught in these airplanes, because there were 350 horsepower turbocharged engines. We were taught you got to stage cool them. You can't just pull the throttles back because you can damage them. So I start stage coaling, and start my timing while holding on to the hatch, trying to keep it closed. I start slowing the airplane down, and ATC comes on and says, "AM flight, whatever I was, climb to this altitude." And I'm like, I can't climb, but I still didn't want to tell them. I'm like, okay, Roger, and I tell them, and I'm slowing the airplane down, and then they come back like 30 seconds later because I hadn't started my climb yet because I'm still messing around with this thing, and they said, hey, you need to climb. And I'm like, hang on, I got a problem. I'm just trying to work something out here, and I'm still slowing the airplane down. And I'm thinking, like, I'm going to have to admit, I'm going to have to confess what I've done here, and I'm going to have to go land. And I was just thinking all the trouble that I was going to get in. Luckily what happened was, as I started slowing the airplane down enough, I was able to get the hatch pulled closed, and I got the latch down to that position, not all the way, but to that position where it was when it had kind of popped. And it was secure. And I thought, okay, I'm all right. So then I was like, I started climbing, and I knew I was going to Payson, which wasn't terribly far from Phoenix. So I went up to Payson, landed. I figured I'm going to get it secure there, and it should be all good to go. I got on the ground at Payson, and I never did admit this. In hindsight, I wish I would have just admitted the stupid thing and gone back to Sky Harbor. But I landed at Payson, got it sorted, and then took off and flew the rest of the flight up to Flagstaff. No issues with it. So I thought, yep, it was me. I was dumb. I screwed something up, so it was my fault. On the way back, I actually had to fly. I had to fly back. The number 1 or number 2 pilot in seniority in our company happened to be up at Flagstaff, and he was going to ride with me to get back to Phoenix. He gets in that other seat, and I'm kind of briefing, and it's like, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, I'm just thinking, this he's got tens of thousands of hours of chieftain time. He's got all this. So we take off, and we're climbing out of Flagstaff, and guess what happens again? The thing pops open again, and I'm like, I know I latched it. And he said, oh, that happens all the time. They get worn out. I'm like, I wish they would have told us that this happens. So he literally told me to take my belt off he took the controls, and I strapped the thing to my belt, and then we flew the rest of the way home and got it back to Sky Harbor to get it fixed. Scared the bejesus out of me. And the biggest thing was, I was just so reticent because I was so scared of getting in trouble. And it turns out it was nothing. I should have just gone and landed and kept the airplane safe. So what's the big thing here? Be humble. Do not be afraid to ask for help. And now I even learned in hindsight too that it would not even have been a big deal. Even if it had been a big deal, it would have been better to land a stupid airplane. So please don't do what I did, because that was just dumb. And I ever since then, something happens, just go back and land. I don't care. So I learned that over time, of just being like, I don't care if I'm gonna get in trouble, just go land the airplane. It's okay. Whew.
That's a big one.
This was a big one. There's more stuff that happened on that flight that I won't share. Oh, there's stuff on the ground. Oh, that was a day. That was a day. All right, let's go to the next one. So this was just one. This was just more of a stressor thing. I'm just going to watch our time too, because I want to make sure we get through. So I'll keep this one a little shorter. But this was my first time ever shooting an ILS. I was taken off out of Burbank or Ontario. I had been sent out there. I think it was during my chieftain training, and so they had us fly a lance run while we were out there, in between doing stuff with chieftain training. And I was tasked to go up to Bakersfield, California, which is not very far from Southern California. And that day, of course, it was my first time ever going there. And you get into that, you fly up over the mountains, which you can kind of see down to the south here. And you fly up over that, and the entire valley was covered in like stratus clouds. Like, it was just this layer, like they just taken icing and just put it over the entire valley. And Bakersfield was reporting it was minimum. So whatever the minimums were for this approach, it was literally at minimums, maybe 50 feet above that. So this is my first time single pilot IFR in the Lance, which I was experienced in the Lance somewhat, but I was not familiar with how close Bakersfield was. And I get up over the mountains, and I'm up at altitude because you can see these mountains that, you know, between, they're like 7,800 feet. So you're up there, and then you got to get back down pretty quick. So I get up and they start having me come down. So again, they had been teaching us to stage cool this airplane. Although I found out later that you didn't necessarily always have to, they were just training us for the Chieftain. And I was cooking. Like, I was going fast and I wasn't pulling the throttle back because I was trying to stage cool it. And they give me a vector to get on the localizer. For my non-instrument folks out there, that's this weird looking thing right here. It's basically a straight radio signal that lets you get onto an approach to the airport that gives you both lateral guidance, really tight lateral guidance, and vertical guidance down to the runway. And I blew through that localizer going so fast. And all I had to do was say to ATC, hey, I'm trying to slow down. I'm going to need a vector, a delay vector or something. Nope. I was a new pilot. I was like, ATC told me to do it. I got to do it. I'm trying to make it work. I blew through the localizer and I'm trying to like get back over. And I wasn't in instrument conditions yet. I was still up above the clouds. But they called me up and they said, you know, M-Flight, whatever, did you kind of were going quick there. Did you want to get another turn? And I'm like, said, yes, that would be helpful. Thank you. So I got it slowed down, turned back around, and then I ended up, just as my first time shooting an approach by myself down the minimums, and my gosh, the stress. So that was scary, and I can just remember thinking to myself, do not mess this up, do not mess this up. In other words I was using at the time, and I did get down, but so there was just stress there. But the big thing I learned from this one was two things. Talk to ATC and just tell them what's going on. Like, hey, I'm trying to get this airplane slowed down. I'm going too fast. And it's like, I can't capture that localizer right now, and admit that I was having issues. And the other part was, know your airplane more. Because again, I told somebody this afterwards, and they were like, oh, you don't have to stage cool the Lance. You can just pull the throttle back. They're just using that to train you on the Chieftain. I'm like, dang it, I wish I would have known that. And so just being honest. So the biggest thing is admit when you screw things up and let them know so they can help you. Because I didn't get in trouble. It was just more of me, again, putting pressure on myself, trying to do what I was supposed to do. Okay.
Yeah, most of those times you're not going to get in trouble unless you don't tell them. Then you are going to get in trouble.
Exactly.
Because you're in a situation then you can't get yourself out of, or you're going to risk yourself or somebody else. So yeah.
Yep. Oh, goodness. All right, Katie, tell us about this one, where this is the other part with that flight, with that long trip with Dave.
The first part of the story with Dave, this is when I tried to kill him. We were in Colorado, flying to a strip that wasn't listed on any aeronautical chart or any aviation database. And I'd been there before, Dave hadn't, and I thought I knew the way. And so I flew up a canyon, and I thought, this is where it is, and it's gonna be right up here at the end of the canyon, and there's like super rising terrain at the end of it, right? One of those kind of box canyons. And there were some clues early on that I have to admit that I ignored. You know, the first one was, wow, this doesn't look familiar, right? That's a really, really obvious first clue that I should have listened to. It, you know, and I was already questioning very early on whether I'd flown up the right canyon. And then the second clue was the radio transmissions from the other airplanes that were at the strip were getting like a lot weaker. So that was my second clue. Kept flying. Hadn't yet admitted to Dave that I didn't think we were going up the right canyon. And then we went around the bend, and as he says it, as Dave said, things were going downhill because the train was going uphill, which is exactly what was happening. Came around the corner. It was supposed to be right there at the bend in the river, expected to see the airstrip, and it wasn't there. We were in the wrong canyon. And now it is Colorado. It's in the afternoon. It was actually after lunchtime. It was in August, end of August, early September, so it was warm. We're at 10,000 feet and climbing, trying to climb. So it's not a good situation to be in, right? And so we had to do it. We had the the escape maneuver, and it was not a hypothetical. Like, this is the first time, of course, I had ever flown the escape maneuver, and even Dave Hirschman, the first time he'd ever had to fly one too. That was a real on, we have to, you know, put in lift flaps, full power, max performance, turn, you know, hugging the side of the canyon to get out. So, okay, lessons learned. Listen to the clues early on, you know, like very early on when I turned up that canyon, I thought, man, this doesn't seem right. I should have listened to it right there, turned back out, gone back. Let's take a look again at the sectional chart. Let's ask some questions. We're talking to other airplanes, you know, ask some questions, figure out what's going on. Listen to those clues early, you know, and act early on them. You can always fly back up it if I needed to. I had plenty of gas, plenty of time, you know, there was no reason we had to be there at a certain time. So yeah, Dave, have total permission to talk about this. In fact, Dave Hirschman, who writes for Pilot Magazine, I'm sure some of you have read him, actually wrote a story about me trying to kill him and him trying to kill me after we got back from this trip. And because there are some serious, really good lessons learned, in what we both experienced. So anyway, listen to the clues and act on them. That's a lesson learned in this one.
And in both cases, I'm thinking here too, it's like, I'm hoping that nobody's getting, because I am not bragging. I don't think you're not bragging about these stories. These were ones where I'm like, that was stupid. I wish I wouldn't have done that. But you know what I'm really seeing too is it's like, when we talk about the hazardous attitude, you always think of these people that are just like, oh my gosh, they were just completely like blowing off, like, oh, I can do whatever, the sort of the cowboy attitude. And I know you, Katie, even though I kind of are a cowboy in terms of living out in Montana, but neither of us, I don't think, are like sort of like risk takers in those terms. But we end up doing these things. These hazardous attitudes are just part of the human nature, and I think that's what we're seeing here. Is like it can happen, and they're insidious. Like I wasn't doing this stuff on purpose, so and I'm sure you weren't either. So yeah. Okay, let's go to this next. Go ahead.
About the things going on around you, right? Like had I been doing that like in the early morning and it was 7 a.m. and there was no wind and it was cool, that's one thing. But like it's just, you talk about a compounding situation, right?
The change.
And right, if there was a time to listen to those clues, it was in that situation, especially during that time of day in those conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, recognizing those things early and often is a really hard thing for humans to do, but it's really important.
Let's see, I think we've got, let me look here. I'm just trying to keep a track of our time. We've got about 14 minutes left for the official webinar. So let's see if this one, we both have had some experience with thunderstorms and not flying into thunderstorms necessarily, just getting a little too close to them. And both of us having flown out in Arizona and out west, if you've flown like back east here, we don't get those air mass thunderstorms quite the same way. Because out in Arizona, I know down in the Phoenix Valley, you get these air mass thunderstorms that literally just, you can see them. Like it's all clear all around it, and there's just this thunderstorm sitting there. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what happened to you in Albuquerque with that and sort of the situation that you got into?
Yeah, I was flying with Embry-Riddle and coming back to Prescott. I was in Albuquerque. It was a long cross country, and I could see a thunderstorm out there, and you could see the shafts, like Chris said. You could see for hundreds of miles out there in that country, and you can see these huge thunderstorms, the downdrafts, the whole thing. And I could see it out there, and I thought, no, it's far enough away that I'm not going to hit the outflow. I can make it to Albuquerque, in plenty of time, land and get the airplane tied down. So that's what I did. I was going for the runway. I could see it, cleared to land. Again, lots of clues. Like it seems out there far, but it's not. It started to get super turbulent. I was getting wind shear, 10 knot variations on final. Landed anyway, got caught in a big downdraft, a big gust right after I landed, and went off the side of the runway and got back on to the runway. But all the clues were there for me to like go back and land somewhere and wait for that storm to pass over, but I didn't. I thought I could beat it, and I thought, it's out there. I can make it before it gets to me, and you can't. Like a lot of those things you can't see. Like 20 miles from a thunderstorm, like that. That's real. That's real, and I experienced it. Fortunately, I didn't hurt the airplane, but I could have in a really bad way. An Embry-Riddle airplane, which would have been extra bad.
Even extra bad. And the same thing with me too. It's like I think that sometimes what we can do is, especially it's like we're just using the example of thunderstorms. There can be weather that you're used to in your area that you get sort of complacent to. Because I know for me, I've had two situations. I'll just talk about one of them just because we're watching our time. But there was I was flying over Lake Pleasant, which is up northwest of Phoenix. There's this big lake up there that we would often use as a landmark to go do maneuvers over. And there was a thunderstorm, it was just an air mass thunderstorm, literally just sitting. It was kind of down by Scottsdale. And it was just sitting there. And I was like, okay, we got it. We'll keep an eye on it. And so I was with a student in a Cessna 172 RG. And I was like, we'll just watch the thing over there. And as long as it doesn't move, we know we can get back to Deer Valley. We'll be okay. Or if we need to, we'll just land out. There's plenty of other airports around. We were out over Lake Pleasant doing maneuvers, and I remember, those little speakers that are on the top of the 172s, like up here where you can, in the old days when you didn't have headsets. I remember hearing like a I'm like, what's that? That's weird. And then, whoa, boom, and then like lightning struck very near us because it was so loud. It didn't hit us, but that's what it was. And then I started hearing it again. It was obviously static electricity building up. We hightailed it back to get down on the ground, and that scared me. So it was that same idea of it's like when they say stay 20 miles away from thunderstorms, it's like, and it was just me building up complacence. I'm like, these thunderstorms, they just sit there, they don't do anything. So it's like, we'll be fine. Don't do that. If they say 20 minutes, 20 miles, stay 20 miles away. So same deal. All right. Just watching our time. We got 10 minutes before the official end. And I know I saw Scott's question here, which I love. He says, please talk about how you stop beating yourself up. We are going to talk about that at the very end here. So let's do one more example, and then let's get to that part of how do you move on from these kinds of experiences. Let me just go to this one. Katie, you want to tell us your story about the power levers and switching airplanes in a jet in this case? This goes for any airplane.
Yeah, any airplane, knowing the differences of the airplanes you are flying, and when you fly something for thousands of hours, it's like that muscle memory is real, and like not falling into complacency when you fly other airplanes, and like reverting back to that muscle memory is sometimes really hard. Example, I flew the CRJ 200 for 5 years, couple thousand hours, lots of landings. On the CRJ 200, after you land to put out thrust reversers, you pull the paddles up on the power levers, and I had done it hundreds, maybe thousands of times, after every landing. I got to AOPA. I was flying the CJ3, landed in Santa Barbara, and did what I had done hundreds of times, pulled up the paddles on the power levers and proceeded to shut the engines down, because on a CJ3, when you pull the paddles up on the power levers, that is to bring it over the gate and shut the engines down. So yeah, there I was, Santa Barbara Airport, and all the warnings, oil pressure are going off. Super embarrassing, because Mark Baker was back there, knew exactly what I'd done, and so it was just, what you learn, like respect the aircraft differences, stay vigilant, fight complacency. I had been worried about doing that before, and it was one of those things where I needed to be more disciplined on every approach to remind myself, keep your fingers off the paddles, just take them off. I just had them there, and this is how I flew for years. And I needed to remind myself on every single approach, about that right before I landed. So yeah, respect those differences. And it's hard to fight complacency. It really is. I fly my 180 now almost exclusively, and I find myself doing it too. Like, hey, you gotta, run that checklist every single time, no matter the fact that you're the only one flying this airplane and you've been flying for 10 hours this month, It's really important.
Yes, and then so I think it's that idea too. So what I'm going to do is I want to jump to this one right here. Let's get to John's, I think, Scott's question. I know we've got lots of other questions I saw popping in that Dan will help us with here, but let's talk a little bit about what do you do then? So these are some of I tried to summarize some of the lessons that we learned here. So we talked about being honest with your ATC and yourself, just like fess up. And that's one thing I've learned over time. It was like, and even with the idea, I've told the story oftentimes on the show about getting into icing conditions, and ATC was just sort of chatting away, and I just started climbing because I knew that it was clear above, like only like 500 feet above where I was. I just climbed and got out of it, and they came back on and like, M-Flight, whatever, are you okay? You're off your altitude. And I was like, yeah, I was picking up ice. I was in a Lance again, picking up ice, and I was like, I needed to get out of it. And they're like, oh, okay, is that altitude good? Yep, all right, and that was it. So that case, be honest with ATC and fess up. And so it was like over time for me, at least, I don't know about you, Katie, but over time for me, it just took time for me to get comfortable with the fact of like, I'm just going to say what I'm doing here, and to stop putting this pressure on myself and not worrying about getting in trouble. Ask for help. Again, this is like that theme of communicating issues, being assertive, whether that's with a crew member, whether that's with ATC, whether that's with your passengers or company, but you are in charge of that flight. So if you know something's not right, don't be afraid. Don't sort of let it build or whatever, think it's going to get better, do something about it. And don't be afraid to be like, I'm making this decision. This is what we're doing. And that decision is going to be the safe decision and the cautious one. Heed what we're taught. If somebody has experience or it's weather or whatever it might be, the things that we're taught in training, please make sure you listen to them. And there's a reason that we have the regulations and the stuff that we learn about weather. And trust your instincts. And then finally, the complacency part. So what would I say here? And I'm going to let you give me your thoughts on this too. But I would say that, like, one thing that you said, Katie, that I really think fits well is we have our procedures and checklists. So when it comes to complacency, being disciplined about your checklist and procedures and not skipping things, that's probably a really big one. And it's sort of like making sure that it is like, I'm going to do this no matter what, even if it means I have to circle out here to finish this procedure, I'm going to do it. Because it's oftentimes we get that pressure, especially coming into land, for instance. I can know is like things start to build up, and you're like, oh, I got to get all this done, and so you'll want to skip a checklist or a procedure just because of like, oh, it's all fine. I'm only flying a 172 or whatever, whatever the thought might be, or I've flown this airplane so much, it'll be good. So I would say really discipline yourself and review your procedures. I've got other thoughts, but let me go. What are you thinking, Katie? What are some ways that people can fight this stuff?
Well, every time I go out and fly, I say to myself, okay, this is gonna be the perfect flight. This is it. This is gonna be the one. But there's never a perfect flight. There's never is. And there's no such thing as a perfect pilot. And after I let that go, like, okay, I'm trying to prove myself to whatever, the people I'm in college with, or my flight instructors, or the airline check airmen, like, you got to get over that, right? Because you're not perfect. And I think I found there's a lot of freedom in being able to talk about mistakes I've made with other people and talk through them and like, what would you have done differently? This is what just happened to me, and it was really dumb, and I'm really lucky it didn't turn out worse. And then what happens is they start telling you stories like, oh yeah, I did that once, or oh yeah, I did that plus some, right? And then all of a sudden you realize like, oh, you know what? Like, we're humans and people make mistakes, but the only way we're going to prevent for them from happening again or happening to somebody else is to actually talk about them. And I found it to be very freeing. I love that you asked me to be on this webinar because I enjoy talking about, I don't enjoy talking about the mistakes I've made, but it also, I think it helps me to be a much better pilot and a much less complacent pilot, and somebody who is willing to talk about the things that we do and ideas for making ourselves better, right? I truly believe in that. And if you've done it, I promise you somebody else has. So.
I want to throw back, we did a webinar, I think it was this past year, we did one on error-based learning that I talked about, and I was getting a little bit into the educational stuff, but in that webinar, I know that there was so go check it out. Maybe what we'll do is on the YouTube, like we'll put that in, Steve, and make a note of that. So that in that part was after your flight is finished, go through and write down the major events. And I have a little form that we had on that webinar, so that's all back on that previous episode. But there was a form, and what you can do is go back through and just write down the major events that happen or mistakes that happen and grade yourself and be honest, and then come up with a plan of like, how do I keep doing, like the things that I did well, how do I keep doing that? What can I do to double down on that to make sure that I keep doing that? And the things I messed up on, now go, whether it's knowing on your own, like, okay, this is what I should have done, or go ask for help. So I'm gonna go talk to a CFI or somebody that I trust. This is what happened. How can I improve on this? How can I make this better? Is there some sort of practice that I can do? Whatever that may be. So take the positive approach to it, because yeah, you're right. You don't want to beat yourself up over it. What you need to do is you need to learn from it so you don't do it again. And I think that's the key here of all these stories that we told is we both learn from it. And from that learning, the biggest thing for me is I became much more assertive in the airplane, where I'm like, I know I'm going to mess up, and now I'm okay telling people, just like now, I'm telling you I screwed up, and I try to learn from it, and I try not to do it again, because the majority of these mistakes are me being not willing to admit that I screwed up, or being afraid of that. So
Yeah, find somebody that you trust that you can have conversations with after your flights, and say, hey, this went really well, or I wasn't happy with this, and why, and find somebody that's, that you find that you can easily talk to about these things and can provide constructive feedback for you, and reassure you that, you're not the only one making mistakes.
Yes, we all do. And if we can help each other learn and heed the lessons other people have learned too, hopefully you'll recognize it. And the biggest thing I'll say is remember too, that these hazardous attitudes and stuff that we learn about, you don't have to be some person that's like, oh, I'm going to be, macho or whatever those ones are. It's like, this stuff is insidious. And so we've got to just be monitoring ourselves and kind of being like, be humble, knowing I'm going to do stuff and just have that plan. Oh, the other thing I'd recommend too is I should have put that on the list here, was using the one of the easiest things to help you with this kind of stuff too is using the Air Safety Institute's personal minimums checklist, because in some cases it's like, when I reach these limits, that's it. I'm just going to land and I'm done. And it makes the decision making easier when you've got limits you set, because oftentimes it's us pushing ourselves. It's not the people outside oftentimes. So if you know that this is my limit and I have promised that I will not exceed this crosswind, or I will not exceed this ceiling, whatever it might be, then it makes it easier. Like, I'm done. Either I'm not flying or I'm going to land now and this is done. Like, I'm not going to push beyond my limits, or push beyond my abilities or the airplanes. Okay, Dan, let's go ahead and we're going to do the official end here, and then we'll go to some of the questions that we've got.
Well done, Chris. 1 o'clock exactly.
I
Amazing.
tried.
It's tight work. All of this we said was done through the AOPA Foundation. Appreciate that. But the AOPA Foundation is the philanthropic arm of AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. Many of you know that. But if you love general aviation, you want to continue to do it, please do consider joining. If you're not already, support the world's largest aviation community. We can do a lot to help protect your freedom to fly with your member support. Beyond that, great publications, awesome information, great resources, discounts, tools. All these benefits are available to AOPA members. We would love for you to join. To learn more, aopa.org/membership.
All right, cool. And then next episode, and we were going to do that this month, and then we had a little mix up. So hoping, and we're going to cross our fingers that this goes off next month, but it's the idea of pick our brains, frequently asked questions from AOPA's Pilot Information Center. We're going to have some of those folks on with us, because if you don't know about this resource here at AOPA, it is amazing. We literally have a team of aviation experts and CFIs that can answer, I would say, almost anything there is about aviation. They can pretty much answer it. It's amazing, or they'll research it for you. So that they'll be on with us next time to talk about some of the frequently asked questions that they get, and then sharing some of the ways that you can also take advantage of that being an AOPA member. If you have any ideas for future topics, please let us know. ftinitiative@aopa.org. I'm going to thank Katie now, but we're going to thank her again after the questions. But Katie, again, thank you for being with us. Katie is sticking around to answer questions, so I'm really curious to know what folks have been asking, because we've been sort of wrapped up in reliving sometimes some not so great experiences that we had. So, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, a few things to talk through. Actually, not a whole lot of questions, but a lot of appreciation. Start with some flowers for Katie. Katrina says, it's so inspiring to hear from a female pilot. I'm still a student pilot. She's a female, and she is, you, Katie, are a true inspiration to her. And she said in all caps, I can do this. So awesome response there. And then really flowers to both of you. A lot of notes just how valuable and interesting this conversation has been, and you've made it real and relatable for everyone on there. Steven said these stories feel so relevant to me. He's just about ready to solo, and it's a great reminder for him to slow his roll and accept the limitations of not just himself, but his aircraft and his instructor. So some great feedback on those fronts. Chris, there were several prompts at the end about your self-assessment, post-flight self-assessment checklist. I'm not sure how we can get that out at this point, but just know maybe there's a way we could grab that link here before we wrap up and do something on that front.
Sure.
But,
so 2 ways that you can find that. I'll tell you what we'll do is I will get it to Steven. So when this gets posted to the YouTube channel, we'll put a link to that handout for you. So we'll make sure we get that. And then the other thing is, if you go back and look, I did one on error-based learning, which was just this past year. So it was in the past 12 months. And I don't know if Steven, you can look it up quickly enough, if able, to see when that was. But we did it this past year. And in that one, that handout is already there on the YouTube channel. So if you go back to our playlist on YouTube, on the AOPA Pilot channel, look for that What's Up, No Fly Learn. I don't know if we had changed the name at that point or not. Anyway, it's there. So that handout is available for you. And there's actually articles in that handout too that even show how to use it.
Very cool. There were several I learned about flying from that type questions, and some of them were even related with the acronym. So that was fun. But this first one was about fuel indications. That fuel indicator was full, but the tank had run out. So really lesson learned from that after the pilot was safely able to restart was to get on the ground, talk to the instructor when they returned, and said, Best practice would be switch tanks every couple hours, and then you know exactly how much fuel is in each one of those tanks. So a great lesson learned there. We've also got one that I'm sure is from, I learned about flying from that is, never abuse your first officer. He or she might just end up being your chief pilot at your next airline. So probably a bigger, more interesting story behind that, but Ken had forwarded that one, and I thought that was great advice there. And also we had a request if you guys could help talk through some best practices for getting an en route weather briefing. And this stems from Thomas, who was flying from Oshkosh to Windham, Connecticut, was on flight following at 4,000 feet, was bumpy and hot, so asked to get higher altitude. Was asked to go up to 10,000, but was not out of the clouds. So just thought, boy, I'm on flight following, I'm doing the right things, but I didn't ask for a briefing, which would have been really helpful there. So any advice as to best practices for getting a weather briefing en route?
Katie, do you want to take any stab at that one? And I've got some ideas, but.
Hey, go for it, and then I'll add to it.
Okay, so some of the things that I was thinking, of course, is getting on with flight service, which is still available, 122.2, and then also on the locally, so you want to look for those and get your flight briefing just like we normally would. If you're on with flight following, don't be afraid to just tell ATC, I'd like to switch over to flight service, or I'm going to be monitoring you, I'm going to be talking to flight service. Just let them know what you're doing, so that way if they make calls, what they'll normally say is just report back on frequency. But it's like you could still be monitoring them, and maybe if you have two radios, talking to them on number 2 or something like that, so you can work that way. So get that briefing. And then the big thing you're probably looking for there is, because the forecast will sometimes show the tops, but ask for pilot reports as well. And you can even ask on flight following for the other pilots in the area, does anybody know where the tops are in that case, or what the weather is at this altitude? Because even though there may not be a pilot report that's been given, you have other airplanes flying around, and ATC might be able to help you get that information from them. So that would be another way of getting it beyond the official reporting.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Katie?
IREPs, I think, are so useful, both using them and giving them, when it's appropriate. Take the time when you're not doing anything else in the cockpit to make those pilot reports, because I use them, and that would be a great scenario right there when it would have been helpful.
And ATC can help you with that too. And don't be. I know people are often afraid of doing pilot reports if you're a newer pilot. So don't be afraid, because they will literally just ask you the questions. They're not going to be like, you have to give it to me in the proper code and the proper order, I won't take it. They'll literally say, what altitude, where are you? They'll walk you through the stuff that they need. So ATC, if they're not busy, can help you with that too.
We've got one from Gary, who sounds like he is also from Montana, with a confession. First flight from Kalispell to Missoula in a new-to-me airplane using a newly purchased GoPro with a magnetic clip. Attached that clip besides the compass and didn't notice the swing until he tried to make sense of the runway 30 degrees off of what it was supposed to be there. So interesting lesson learned using technology and attaching that to the airplane. Here's one that sounds like it came from an instructor. And the ending is interesting on there, but it would be nice if instructors learned to tell students not to shove the throttle forward at 500 feet on a simulated engine out. Stalling the engine only makes the instructor mad, and then the instructor has to jerk on the mixture, open the throttle, reach over and crank the engine until the vapor is cleared. Then get the engine restarted, and here's where it gets fun, before terrifying the golfers on the par 5. So interesting lesson learned. So it sounds like that came from a real life experience there. And I'll be honest, guys, that was the extent of the questions and comments that came in. So we're there. We're at the end.
There's one more I see at the end there, specifically for Katie. It says, Katie, what was the exact point that you told yourself, I need to accept and take off? Thank you. And I assume they mean maybe one of those crosswind takeoffs when you want to cross the runway, or?
Say that again, like when I needed to take off?
What was the exact point where you were thinking to yourself, I'm going to do this and take off? Like where you weren't like, I'm not going to abort. I'm assuming it was that crosswind takeoff they're talking about, with the one where you kind of it was in North Dakota maybe, where you took off, or is that what it was? And then the really bad crosswind in the 180?
There was a point, on that one, it was, I'm going to go until I don't feel like my airplane can handle the conditions anymore, and then I will stop. you know, so it was more of that. Maybe he's thinking about like, or the point, like when I had fuel starvation in the Super Cub, and it was the point where I was about to get to the point where I was going to stop troubleshooting and, you know, make a off-field landing. You know, I thought about that a lot after the fact, you know, like would I have given it more time? Was it the right amount of time? You know, I think about that a lot in a lot of different scenarios. You know, at what point do you stop troubleshooting and then try to land the airplane?
Yeah. And that's a good one to really reflect upon, because,
you know, based on where you're at in the conditions. And, you know, in my case, a Super Cub with amphibs had like 0 glide. So it's a much different calculus than if you were, you know, in a clean, you know, Cirrus or something, or clean with the wheels down.
Yeah, almost a helicopter landing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, okay. All right. It looks like I do. And in fact, everybody is saying, so oh, go ahead. You saying something, Katie?
There was one more question. Maybe not.
Yeah, go ahead and look. Meanwhile, what I'll say is just Katie will look for that question, see if she can find that one. In the meantime, what I'll say is obviously everybody, thank you so much for being with us this year. We hope you had a great year, and we look forward to having you back in January. We'll hold off in case Katie finds that question, but we'll be back, like I said, on January 16th. I did check the Zulu time, or the Universal Time Coordinated, so it should be accurate this time. We'll try to be careful, 1700 UTC. And obviously want to thank, hopefully everybody has great holidays and Christmas and all the good stuff coming up. So hope you enjoy some time with your families and a great new year as well. We'll see you then. Were you able to find the question?
I did. It was from Kurt. He asked, he'd like to ask each speaker, of the close calls that we experienced, that we described, which of those were most likely to could have caused an accident or incident?
Man, for me, it was probably those thunderstorms, or not the thunderstorms, but the storms. It was like because I had asked ATC, I'm like, am I in a thunderstorm? And they're like, we don't see any thunderstorms on the radar. I was scared though, especially that one coming out of Fort Huachuca going. All I had to do was make the hop to Tucson, and it was clear to the rest of the flight home. That I was scared in that one. I was up and down a couple thousand feet, and I couldn't hold altitude. So that probably that was the worst. And I was purposely not trying to hold altitude, even though ATC was telling me to, because I even said I need to block altitude or something, because I did not want to overstress the airframe. So that was probably the one. How about you?
Mine was probably flying up the canyon. I mean, I was out of options at that point. It was either a high performance turn or terra firma. So, I mean, it was high performance. So I didn't have a lot more time to have flown, continued, and then made that decision and got out of that scenario. So
yeah, and snuck up on you, I assume too. I mean,
very forgiving flying in that, you know, in that situation. So great questions.
Yes, they are good questions. All right, Dan. Was that? I think that's as far as we know. We've got them all. So again, thank you everybody. Thank you, Katie, for coming on and sharing with me. I figured we would be able to hopefully give some good lessons out. I hope people got something valuable. So appreciate your time being here.
You're welcome.
All right. And for Dan and Steven, I'll see you all next time, and fly safe.
All right.
Bye-bye.